Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for attending this today. Very important conversation we're having, very timely as well. Before I get into my questions, though, I just want to reiterate something my colleagues have said before. The overhaul of banking regulations before us today isn't just about the globally, systemically important banks. The proposal will affect regional and mid-sized banks as well as their customers, but I don't think it's going to stop there either. During the limited public comment period, the regulators heard from Georgians on all sides of the political spectrum who are concerned about this proposal. I have a few of their comments right here. I'd love to read them all aloud, but we don't have time for that. So I'd like to insert all of those for the record.
Object without.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Georgia lost more small and community banks than any other state. After Dodd-Frank and the regulations that were imposed, since I've been in Congress, we were very slow to see de novo banks and community banks reinstated. In fact, when I first came onto this committee a few years ago, we still had 15 counties in Georgia that did not have a small or community-owned bank, and there were 2 that had no bank whatsoever. And a lot of that was because of the regulation. Now, I've got a whole suite of questions, but really I think I can summarize this down what you've heard today. On both sides of the aisle, there are a lot of problems with this regulation. So, Mr. Bear, I ask you first, would there be a downside to entirely withdraw this proposal and, given all the problems, to reintroduce it in a way that addresses a lot of the concerns that you've heard about here today?
Yeah, Congressman, I mean, I think that's completely appropriate and necessary in this case. You know, some of the changes that need to be made based on the data and the analysis were not even within the scope of the proposal. And we've talked a little bit about, the fact that the cost-benefit analysis, which is actually legally required, and I'll get to that in a sec, is going on through a belated QIS where we're never really going to get a chance to analyze what those costs and benefits are. That also seems to merit re-proposal. I'd note, in answer to Professor Kress, the Supreme Court's held, even though there's no explicit cost-benefit requirement in a statute, that doesn't mean that you consider the costs and benefits. In Michigan versus EPA in 2015, the Supreme Court actually ruled that in a statute that said that the regulation should be appropriate and necessary, that included a cost-benefit analysis. In fact, the court said, quote, agencies have long treated costs as a centrally relevant factor when deciding whether to regulate. Consideration of cost reflects the understanding that reasonable regulation ordinarily requires paying attention to the advantages and the disadvantages of agency decisions, end quote. So I think that's what's necessary here and really didn't happen the first go-round.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gwynn, do you have thoughts on this? I mean, one of my concerns is seeing what happened post-2008, and a lot of that was because of capital requirements. I really don't want to see rural areas of Georgia go without local community banks, and basically those areas be taken over just by the big players. Same question to you. Would there be a downside to withdrawing the proposal entirely and then reissuing something that addresses these concerns?
I think that could be a good, well, I actually want to address also the question you asked at the beginning of your series of questions, which is, will this have an impact on smaller banks or will it be limited to the large banking organizations? It's very interesting because when the long-term debt requirement was first proposed, it was only, and it's currently only applicable to the GSIBs. Now, my colleagues and I warned other banks that, sometimes these requirements at the top have a tendency of coming to a theater near you, and now they're actually coming to a theater near the large regional banks. And so you really, if high standards are good, over time they seem to be good for everybody, both big banks and small banks. And I think there is a risk that they will sort of be imposed downward. And also, there is this $100 billion level, right? There's a cliff effect. So if you're a smaller bank and you may, the economy may actually encourage you and you want you to grow to a larger, to become more competitive, you will be deterred to do that because if you cross the $100 billion threshold, all of a sudden you're subject to all these increased capital long-term debt requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see I'm out of time, and I yield back.